Still to come on Nightwatch, George Wallace, The Next Generation, and an amazing mystery writer. Now in Washington, here is CBS News correspondent Charlie Rose.
Novelist. In the time since then, P.D. James has been credited with bringing new life to the classical murder mystery form. Her characters are so interesting and her writing so absorbing that finding out who done it in a James book is said to be the icing on the cake. P.D. James' newest mystery is called Devices and Desires, and reviewers say it may be her best yet. We are very pleased to have P.D. James join us now for a conversation not only about her career and this book, but also about mystery books in general. Welcome.
Lovely to be here.
Oh, not as much as it is for us to have you here. Devices and Desires. Let me just to understand the genre. It takes you about 4 years to write a book.
Yes,
Okay.
yes it does.
And you have done all kinds of things, from taking, I want to talk about place and about characters. Set this one up for me. How did it, what gave birth to this book?
Well, with me, the setting is nearly always the beginning. It's the setting that sparks off the creative imagination with me. And this book began when I was visiting the east coast of England. Actually, I was in a county called Suffolk, and standing on a very lonely stretch of beach, Pebbly Beach, looking out over the turbulent and dangerous North Sea, was a little wooden fishing smack drawn up and a few nets drying in the wind. And I thought, you know, this view hasn't changed in 1,000 years. If I'd been standing here 1,000 years ago, I might have seen the Viking ships invading. And then I just turned north, and there on the horizon was this huge bulk of Sizewell Atomic Power Station. And I thought of the difference, you know, there are windmills on that bit of coast, the difference between the wind power and the nuclear power. There are ruined abbeys, there's the decaying fortifications of the last war against invasion. And I thought of all the centuries that passed on that lonely coast. And I thought, right, I want to set my next book
this was
on
the
just such a
inspiration.
place. That was the inspiration. I moved it north to Norfolk because obviously I didn't want to write about a real power station. So I moved it a little further north to an imaginary headland promontory. And that was the beginning.
And then what comes next? You put your character, you have to have your characters there.
The characters next.
Yeah. Now we know that there are going to be certain central characters.
We know, at least I did, that Adam Dalglish was going to be a case for him.
From Scotland Yard has got to go up there.
Scotland Yard.
Yeah.
So how do I get him down there? What is he doing down there? You know, so I think, well, he's gone on holiday because he's published a new book of poems. They're very successful. He's running away from all the publicity. So he goes to stay in a converted windmill. And then, of course, who's going to be
But
murdered?
wait a minute, there's a new element here. He's inherited some money.
He's inherited some money from his aunt, yes.
And so he's now independently rich.
He's independently rich, so that's going to, you know, he's a chap who tends to have problems. This is going to be a new problem, isn't it? Is he going to continue to be a detective, or is he going to write poetry all the time? But
so
still,
he goes up
that's
to
probably in the
Norfolk to
future.
sort of look up to this estate.
Just to,
Right.
you know, yes, cope with her books and cope with the estate. And, of course, being Dalglish, he may escape, you know, from all the... from his job and from all the pressure of the publicity about the book, but he never escapes from murder.
Okay, now we've got to get him there, and we've got the setting, you know, and we've got the power station, and we've got the scene.
Yes.
You know, and when do we begin to say who gets killed?
You mean when I'm plotting and planning it?
Yes.
Yes.
We're plotting
next
now.
I think, yes, I've got him there. Who's going to get killed? Well, I want the power station, in a sense, to dominate the book. So I think it's going to be somebody who works at the power station. So I start thinking who's going to be there. There's the director, Dr. Alexander Mayer. He's a very brilliant, ambitious scientist. And then there's a woman who's the acting administrative officer, who has been his mistress. And a great many people on the headland have strong reasons to dislike her. So she's going to be the victim. And then I have to think, why do they dislike her so much? And that provides the motives.
And therefore, we're off and
We're
running.
getting there, aren't we, when we get the motives? It's a very curious process, this, because what it feels like to me, not that I'm inventing all these people, but it feels to me as if they exist in some limbo of my imagination, and I'm getting in touch with them and getting their stories down in black and white. I think this is a fascinating part of writing a book when you're plotting and planning.
Now that takes about, what, 18 months to 2 years?
Well, it could do. When we said it took 4 years, it probably would have been more
No, I was
accurate.
thinking that took 2 years, and the writing took 2 years, but am I wrong
Well,
about that?
yes, I think it's probably fair to say there's a gap of 3 or 4 years between books, and of course for part of that time I might not be plotting or planning or anything, but once I am plotting and planning, it certainly takes about half the time is spent on this process and half on writing.
Now, which is harder for you?
Oh, the writing.
The writing.
The writing's harder.
Is it
yes.
really?
Oh, yes.
Oh, now listen to this. This is one review, but it says it well. Through Daglish and On Our Own, we encounter a fascinating mix of people, an enigmatic cooking writer and her scientist brother who is the chief of the power station, a muddled anti-nuclear activist, and the voluptuous young unmarried mother who shares his trailer, power station executives and underlings with ambitions and aberrations of their own, a widow whose teaching career has been destroyed by the fashionable orthodoxies of race relations, must a blackboard be called a chalkboard, and icy beauty involved with an unprepossessing wimp, an alcoholic painter and his 4 motherless children, sibling relationships with figurative as well as literal blood ties, a variety of sexual relationships. From you! The pros and cons of nuclear power, religion, and religiosity are explored and exposed. My goodness.
My daughter sometimes says to me, with you we get 6 books for the price of one. When you read that, I can see what they mean, actually.
That's right. Now, you give us clues as to who did it.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
but we see some of the clues that Daglish doesn't see.
Yes.
Now, that's a little troubling to some people.
Well, I think this is a very interesting aspect of it, that the reader knows far more than either of the detectives.
Right.
Because as Dalglish is the Metropolitan Police detective, of course, he can't really investigate the death of this woman.
Because
it's for the Norfolk
and
Police.
it's from Mr. Terry
And
Rickard.
there's an interesting relationship, I think, between the officer who is investigating it, Rickards, and Dalglish, although it is Dalglish who gets the truth, or as close to the truth as anyone can get.
Of course that's true. He had to be the one to do it, didn't he?
But we see, well...
Yeah, but is it, I mean, normally, we know more than that character. Why is that better to do than to see it only through the detective's eyes, so as he progresses,
That's
we
one
progress.
way of doing it, and some very effective books have been written that way.
Yeah.
I find with my rather long and complex books that that's too limiting.
Yeah.
I like readers to see events from different points of view. And of course, there's a wonderful irony in that way. There's one scene there when, at the scene of death, there are 2 glasses, because the woman who's murdered, she's expecting her lover to visit her, and she's got the wine out, but before she swims, she takes a drink of wine. Then she finds there's a little chip in the vase, so she empties it away and takes another one, because she's one of those people who can't bear to drink from a chipped vase. And of course she's going a chipped glass, and she's going to throw the glass away, and then because her lover gave her the set, she doesn't want to. She thinks she can put flowers in it. So when the police come, there are 2 glasses washed up, you see. And the police say, right, Rickard said, look, common sense is common sense. Somebody was drinking with that woman here tonight. 2 glasses. And we, the reader, know
that she
was drinking alone.
Right.
You see. So I think there's a nice irony
to
me in the reader occasionally, not always, knowing more than the police and seeing the police go wrong, you know, saying who would she have let in, who would have been drinking with her tonight. And we know nobody was drinking with her.
P.D. James is here. What a delight it is. Devices and Desires is her new murder mystery. And we'll talk more when we come back. We hope you'll stay with us. We are back. Phyllis is here. Phyllis James is here. P.D. James is here. Phyllis. It's Phyllis.
It's Phyllis?
But it's P.D.
James.
James.
James is my maiden name.
Is your maiden name? That's
and
right.
I use my initials.
Okay. And your married name was?
White.
White. That's right. That's what I was thinking. Mm-hmm. This is the 12th book or the 11th?
11th.
This is the 11th. It's more complex. What have you learned in the process of going from book 1 to book 11?
Well, when I reread, well, I don't really reread it, but sometimes I have to because people want to reissue it. So when I look again at the first one, it does seem to me rather simple, very derivative. People love the first one because it's the country house murder. It's called Cover Her Face, and many of my readers have a huge affection for this book. And I have, you know, first child almost, as it were. But I think they have become more complex. I think I'm able to cope with complex structure in a novel now.
And are you also skewing towards more character develop, more interesting characters, more fleshing out of characters?
Yes, I think every writer does that as the time passes. I get more and more interested in character. But I think that I have to remember, I do try to remember, that it is also a mystery, so that we want to have the tension and the excitement and, in fact, the clues and the detection.
There is a formula, and there's a
indeed.
richness of variety that approach the formula.
Yes,
What's
it's
the
fascinating.
formula?
Well, if we have a mystery, what we expect is a central mystery, which really is nearly always central mysterious death. It doesn't have to be, but really in 99.99, it's a central mysterious death. Have a close circle of suspects, each with credible motive, means, opportunity for the crime. You have a detective who can be either professional or amateur, who comes in rather like an avenging deity to solve this crime. And by the end of the book, you have a solution which the reader should be able to arrive at himself or herself by logical deduction from the clues. Now, that is the format. And, you know, you're absolutely right, Charlie. What is fascinating to me is the extraordinary variety of books and talents which this so-called formula writing is able to accommodate. Because that formula would apply to Wilkie Collins' The Moonstone, it applies to Devices and Desires, it applies to an Agatha Christie, The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, it applies to Dorothy Sayers, and yet they're vastly different writers.
Yeah, you also have said stupid people don't read mystery novels.
Well, that's been, I must say, my experience. They don't. Nor, of course, do criminal people.
They don't?
No, no.
Why not?
Well, I think you need some intelligence to figure it out, maybe. And perhaps, you know, criminals aren't interested in fictional crime. But it strongly appeals, really, to I think, respectable, fairly successful, law-abiding, intelligent people.
And people are interested. I would assume that people who like to read mystery novels also like crossword puzzles?
I think it's very possible.
There is
very
a kind
possible. There's the same kind of analytical mind, really.
Yeah.
I mean, it's reading for relaxation. One accepts
But
that.
I have a feeling that you feel that mystery novels ought to have the same exalted position that novels have, that the novels of great writers ought to have, and that mystery novelists like you have not been given the kind of literary position they ought to have.
Well, you know, this is difficult, Charlie, because I think to an extent most people who write mysteries dislike the artificial division between the mystery and the so-called straight novel. But I honestly don't think I can complain, because...
You haven't complained.
I don't think I personally can complain about this.
No, you
because
can't.
the Queen gave me the OBE as a writer, and I chaired
That's the order of the
Booker
British
judges.
Empire.
I mean, for a mystery writer to be chosen to chair the panel of judges for the prestigious Booker Prize for Fiction, which is our most prestigious book, I think I was appointed as a governor of the BBC because I was a writer. So it certainly hasn't happened to me. I think, you know, I am taken seriously. But and I think, you see, you can apply it also to spy fiction. Right, maybe a lot of spy thrillers are not taken seriously, but John le Carré and Eric Ambler are taken seriously as writers. So it may mean that if you really are a good writer, and I don't wish to sound conceited, but John le Carré is a very fine writer.
You can't sound conceited.
If you are a good writer, you will transcend your genre.
Yeah.
But certainly there is, I would agree, a rather snobbish feeling generally that any genre fiction must be inferior to the so-called straight novel, and I think people writing that genre think that's rubbish, because it is rubbish. It is rubbish, isn't it? It is rubbish.
Are mystery novels as popular? Because there was a time that I had a feeling that maybe le Carré and people that were writing these sort of spy novels had taken a more central position in terms of popularity.
I think you're right, Charles. There certainly was. Whether this will continue now that we're living, thank God, in a more peaceable world, I don't know. But the mystery now has had a remarkable resurgence of popularity. You know, it's almost a mystery in itself. I mean, back home, the publishers really are sort of dusting off and reissuing old favourites of the 30s. And all the good ones of the 30s have already been reissued now. They're sort of a bit scraping the barrel, I think. There's an insatiable appetite for the mystery novel.
Yours lend themselves to film and television.
Yes. Yes,
Do you
certainly.
think that way when you write?
No.
You're not conscious of visualization?
No, never, no. I never, ever write except to please myself and to do the very best I can with the idea I've got. You know, I never think, well, this will make a good scene.
But you have a visual sense in your head.
I have a very strong visual sense in my head. And in a way, writing the book is rather like, for me, shooting a film, because I often do it out of order.
Yeah.
You know, I don't start at the beginning and go right through. And I do sort of think, well, I will write the scene where Dalgleish finds the body by moonlight. Yeah. I will write the scene where Rickard is interrogating some of the suspects, you know. And I write them out of order. So that is really rather as a director would film, isn't it?
Yeah, it sure is. P.D. James is here, Devices and Desires. We'll talk more when we come back. Stay with us. We're back with P.D. James. Tell me what the morality is at play in most mystery novels. I mean, people say that it, you know, I mean, the easy answer to that is, well, you know, the good guys, the murderers are punished and the good guys win. You know, but yeah, it's more sophisticated and subtle than that.
Now, it's much more subtle now. It used to be very simplistic. If we think of the 1930s, it was simply good triumphed over evil.
Right.
And as I say, the detective is rather a symbol of triumphant individualism, this wonderful, omni-talented amateur who came in and solved the crime. And he vanquished the evil murderer, and at the end, peace was restored. And with the novels of writers like Agatha Christie set in these little villages, you know, the village gets back to normality. Now, with the modern mystery, you still get the basic moral premise that murder is uniquely wrong, that human life is sacred, that even if you have someone as unpleasant as some of the villains in the book, he has a right to live his life to the last natural moment. The book does vindicate human justice, imperfect as that may be. But nevertheless, in the modern mystery, and I think it was particularly so in a book I wrote before this called A Taste for Death, you see that every life that comes in touch with this contaminating and appalling crime is somehow altered. And at the end, you may have the mystery solved, but everyone's life is changed. Some lives are changed for good, and some lives are changed for worse. And sometimes the innocent suffer more than the guilty. In other words, I suppose what we're saying is that the mystery, although it's written within the convention, is closer to the moral ambiguities of real life.
And much is said about your sense of reality, because you want to say to your characters, this is men and women suffering.
Yes.
Right. I mean, these are people with foibles and flaws.
Yes,
and they're real people that...
Yes, hopes, desires, needs,
ambitions, and failures, and all that all of us experience.
Absolutely. And also, I think I'm fascinated by the influence of the past over the present, by the long shadow which the past can cast over the present. So that nearly always in my books, we learn quite a lot about the character's past life, because that, after all, is influencing what they do. I mean, someone just doesn't become a murderer overnight.
Yeah, the child is father of the man.
Absolutely.
You came to this late. 40 years old. I mean, you even said to yourself, I better get on with this or
Indeed.
else.
Absolutely.
Or else.
Absolutely,
and I suspect
Charlie.
that's your great regret, because...
Yes, it is.
Is it?
It is, because by the time, I mean, I'm 70 this year, I mean, one is very aware that there aren't that number of years left, and it does seem awful. Suppose I started at 20, there's 20 years of writing. But then, I mean, would I have been ready? I mean, I suppose in some moods I can feel that, you know, I began when I was ready to begin. And certainly the first book I wrote, Cover Her Face, was accepted by the first publisher it was sent to. So I didn't go through long years of rejection. But
why did you come to it so late? I know something about it, but I'd rather hear it from you.
Yes.
You were a civil servant. You worked at the Home Office.
Well, I did. That wasn't at that time. That wasn't until much later. No, I came to it late. I was 19 when the war broke out. I married very young. But I was living in London. And, you know, we were being bombed. It was...
He was a physician?
He was, yes, he was. He went to the war, to the Royal Army Medical Corps. And when, you know, you're living in a city that's being more or less perpetually bombed, you need an awful lot of sort of determination to start writing a novel. Because anyway, there's no paper, there was no chance of getting it published. So that was one excuse. Then after the war, he came back mentally ill, so I needed a safe job. to support him and 2 children. So, you know, I didn't think writing would produce a check at the end of every month that would be big enough.
Now,
so
were
I
you
went
trying
into
at all,
hospital.
though, during those
No,
periods?
I did nothing.
You did nothing?
Nothing. Well, I went into hospital administration, and then I went to evening classes to get professionally qualified. So I have a diploma in hospital administration, and I have a diploma in record keeping.
Yeah.
No use to me at all now. And then got more senior jobs and more money, and then took an exam into the to get into the civil service. But while I was in the health service, this moment occurred that I realized, you know, it's never going to be easy, and there's never going to be free time, and there's never going to be a convenient moment. And I think I'd say that to, you know, anyone watching this program who has ambitions to be a writer. You have to make the time and do it.
Yeah.
I spent too long thinking about it.
Yeah, just do it. I mean,
Do it.
Just do it.
Do it.
It really is. You can't. You can
No.
ruin a life by postponing things and saying,
You can.
I'll be later ready. I'll be ready later.
Absolutely, yes. I regret that I spent so long.
Did you not write until he died?
No, the first 2 books were published when he was
Before he
alive.
died,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
And the children now?
Yes, well, my children now are well into middle age.
But they're not writers.
No, one of them can write exceptionally well. She teaches English literature at Oxford to American students who go there for their years overseas, but she never sends anything in. She doesn't want to be a published writer.
Do you live in
It's
Oxford?
rather sadness to me. I have a little house in Oxford, but I live in London.
Yeah. What brings you the greatest satisfaction from
the writing?
From these children of yours, these 11 children you have?
I think the fact that I've actually produced them, despite the difficulties, the fact they've been well received critically, that I can feel that they are well written, the fact that they do obviously give immense pleasure to many thousands of people. That's lovely for a writer. And when I come to this country and meet my fans, the American fans are so warm-hearted and enthusiastic, you know.
Yeah.
It does the heart good of a writer. So you feel you've given pleasure.
Do you go around the world when you go on these tours? I mean, you're published in how many languages?
Oh, about 16, I suppose.
16, I would think so.
Yes, about that.
You're popular in Japan?
Oh, yes. Yes. It's astonishing, really, because they're very English books, aren't they? You know, it's so astonishing. One wonders, you know, how in many of these countries people can relate
well,
to them.
the world is becoming smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yes, it is. And there's something about the mystery form, you see. A
That is universal.
touch of murder and mayhem and mystery makes
And
the whole
sex,
world care.
And sex.
And sex, yes. And sex, I suppose.
You suppose.
Well, yes, but I haven't got many sort of...
Graphic sex scenes.
Graphic sex
Yeah, but they're
scenes.
relationships.
Oh,
that
yes. And it's left more to the imagination. Oh, yes. I mean, sex is such an important part of life, isn't it? And it nearly always provides a motive, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a mystery in which there isn't a sexual motive there somewhere.
Now, has the method of killing changed?
Yes, I think it has, actually, Charlie. Because in the 1930s, you had to be extraordinarily ingenious, you know. There was a great enthusiasm for bodies with looks of terrible horror in rooms which nobody could get into with windows barred and doors barred. There were wonderful ingenious things like people being hit with lumps of ice which then melted, you know, all sorts of ingenious ways. But now I think the method is far closer to real life.
Yeah.
Because, as
Guns
I say,
and knives and poison?
yeah, the old things, guns and... I keep away from guns on the whole. I don't really understand guns very much.
Leave that too.
But, yeah, it's the sort of methods that you might get in real-life murder. And the interest is far more on the characterization than on the ingenuity. You see that in the novels of Dorothy L. Sayers. I don't know whether she's read very much here, but her methods are so ingenious. They're too ingenious for the murderers. They wouldn't have thought of it that way, you know. But it wasn't any good in the 30s. You've got to do something new, something original, something bizarre.
P.D. James is here, and we'll be back with more in just a moment. Stay with us. We are talking with P.D. James. Devices and Desires is her 11th book. Some say it is her best. We'll find out whether she believes that or not. Here is the opening line. The Whistler's fourth victim was his youngest, Valerie Mitchell, aged 15 years, 8 months, and 4 days. And she died because she missed the 9:40 bus from East Haven to Cobb's Marsh. That'll hook me right there. Now, do you think a lot about that opening line, as someone said, James, or someone said, is important?
Yes, yes. Oh, I do. Yes, you've got to get... I think that the first sentence and the last sentence are both tremendously important. Really.
Now, will I
Yes.
give it away if I read the last sentence?
Well,
Let's
I
see.
think
Well, what the heck?
it wouldn't mean very
Oh,
much
no,
until
it
you read
won't.
the book.
Okay, so I'll
Really.
say, and then she smiled at these portentous imaginings and turning to wave a final goodbye to the tall figure still standing at the mill door, she strode out resolutely for home. The Copleys would be waiting for their afternoon tea. You'd only understand that if you'd read the book.
Yes, I think you would.
What's the hardest part for you? It is the writing of it. Now,
Yes,
what's
I think
hard
the
about
writing.
the writing?
Well, it's emotionally quite hard. It's very tiring. I mean, I think that creativity is. It's immensely satisfying,
Yeah.
striving to get it just right. And there are the days when it doesn't seem to come right, and you don't know whether to carry on persevering or put it on one side. You know.
Do you do it? Do you write and then edit and edit and edit until you get it exactly
yes.
right, or do you get all the way through and then go back and?
Well, sometimes I find on lucky days it's as good as I can do it the first time. That's a bit rare. I do it by hand, partly on the electric typewriter. Then I dictate that onto tape, and then I revise again. And some passages, some chapters, you know, I may revise many times.
Now, Douglas is a poet. You also, in your heart, are a poet.
Well, I tried when I was a girl to write some poetry.
Well,
and
there's
it would be
some
lovely to
poetry
be
in
a
here.
poet. But
Yeah. I mean, but you're speaking through him anyway, so obviously
Yes.
there's some poetry in your soul.
yes, I hope so. I'm very fond of poetry anyway. I'm very fond of it.
Have you ever thought about a book of poetry?
No.
No.
Yeah.
You don't want to branch away from, this is what you do well, and therefore this is what I will
I
continue
think if
to
I
do.
felt, frankly, John, if I felt that I was a better poet, it would be lovely to have a book of poetry. I don't think I'm that good a poet, frankly. I don't think basically I am a poet.
Any great regrets other than the fact that it might have been better if you started earlier because you'd have more time to write now? I mean, you know.
Not about my writing, no. I think I've been extraordinarily fortunate, and I'm really very grateful.
Fortunate to have the gift, or fortunate?
Fortunate to have had the gift, fortunate to have had the physical strength, you know, to be able to fulfill it.
Yeah.
Fortunate in the end, it took a long time maybe in the response I've had. Fortunate in my fans.
Yeah.
Yes.
You love the
lucky.
fans. You care about the fans. I mean,
Oh, I do,
There's
yes.
a bond between
There
you
is
and
a
them.
bond between us, yes, there is,
And
undoubtedly.
when they write you must get tons of mail.
Yes, that is a problem. I have to say, that is a problem. Oh dear, it comes, you know, heavy through the post twice a day.
Do you respond? Do you have people that respond
I try
to them?
to, yes. But, you know, the difficulty is so much of one's time is spent really writing and responding to requests to talk or to visit or to teach. That,
This may be obvious to you, but is this the best? Do you think this is the best?
I'm not sure. A lot of people feel it is. It's certainly among the best. I find it very difficult to judge between that and, say, the previous one,
A Taste for
Death.
I thought you'd think A Taste for Death might be better.
I thought was very good. Really now, it sounds conceited, but I felt very satisfied with, let's put it like that.
So you're not sure
But
this is as good as A Taste for Death?
I would wonder if it was entirely as good as A Taste for Death. I think they're neck and neck. And neck. I suppose it deals with something new, atomic power. It's more concerned with some of the great issues than A Taste for Death.
Yeah, it sure is. Did you research that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I went to 2 atomic power stations, yes, and spent a lot of time there.
Because therefore you have the power of observation in the sense you can smell the place.
Yes. And also, you see, I spoke to the scientists, I spoke to the physicists and the engineers. I wanted to see their point of view, and I'm not a scientist myself. And this was really an extension of the field for me. And I hope I got it right. I think I have.
I think you do, too. Would you, now that it's here, and now that it's out, and now that people in England and in the United States are buying it, would you change anything about it? Once you finish, do you put it away and say, that's
No,
it?
I wouldn't change anything. No, I did my best. I think that book is as good as it can be. You know, given the inspiration, given the plot, given the characters, I wouldn't change anything in it. And nothing any critic has said would make me change it. Makes me feel I should have changed anything in it. No.
Is Daglish you? Is he what you would be if you were him?
I think he's colder than I am.
colder.
Yeah, I think so. More reserved, possibly. I don't know, because I think basically I am probably rather reserved.
Yeah, but you like to write among the maelstrom of things that are going around you.
Oh, yes.
You're not someone that retreats to a small, quiet
Not at all.
cottage to finish a book.
Not at all. No, I don't think... I mean, sometimes I feel to have that peace and privacy would be good, but I need to have life milling round me. Yes. He's got... I suppose if I were a man, he is the kind of man I would quite like to be.
Yeah, or the kind of man you'd quite like to, if you had a second love affair, be with.
I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure about that.
May you continue to write, and because your audience eagerly awaits each P.D. James mystery, and it's a delight. And I hope you'll come back to see us when you revisit these shores again.
I hope so. It's been a great pleasure to
Thank
meet
you, Phyllis.
now.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Nightwatch continues. Back in a moment.